The twisted piece of wire bit into SosKaid's wrists, drawing a little bit of blood as the two women were pulled roughly by the rope attached to their improvised handcuffs. SosKaid staggered, eventually falling to a knee in the dust before quickly managing to right herself and regain her footing. The cruel voice sputtered into a disconcertingly happy, high-pitched laugh. She looked around, trying to see any sign of Dogmeat. He was nowhere to be seen. Her mind started ticking over. They had to find an advantage. Something. Anything. That cold feeling in her stomach intensified as they were dragged into the stinking structure. She looked at her fellow captive, desperate to see some spark, some hope in her eyes. But there was nothing but fear. Fear and pleading. The laugh rang out again, bouncing off the small, echoey space around them. There was no question. They were in serious trouble. Hello and welcome back to A Wasteland Story. In the last episode of the show, SosKaid and Dogmeat were waylaid by a bunch of buzzing bloody mozzies in the forest as they searched for the trail of the missing Brotherhood of Steel members. There they ran into some settlers from before who'd apparently been trying to help, although it could be debated who saved who in the end. They did, however, now have a direction to follow, and follow it they will. Of course, if Dogmeat can recover from his nearly fatal blood bug sting and nothing mysterious attacks them along the way. We'll see about that. And speaking of monstrous, this is probably something I should mention more often, and I do assume that if you're listening to this and you've been following along, you know what you're in for. But it is worth stating here, and perhaps in this episode specifically, that Fallout, while funny and exciting, is also pretty nasty. It can be adult at times, and as such, so is SosKaid's story. There's description of violence, drugs, swearing, death, dismemberment. And although I generally don't get too graphic, there are also some insinuations at particularly nasty adult themes. But they aren't reveled in for the sake of it, but rather used to support the quote-unquote realistic nature of the Fallout world. So that's a warning, and with that, let's get on with the show. Okay, back for a quick session. We left off after defeating the blood bugs. SosKaid and the settlers made camp in the forest. She was able to unstun them, so they may well be able to lead her out of the forest. I think they've been living around here for a little while, so they know the area reasonably well, and perhaps they saw something. So let's find out if they saw what happened to the mysterious death of the Brotherhood leader, Marcus, or whoever. Dogmeat and SosKaid continued along the dust-covered road, keeping the edge of the forest on their right-hand side. She was glad to see him doing better, but they had to stop every 20 or 30 minutes so that he could rest. He would then inevitably force himself to his paws with a wobble and a brave little whine, seemingly intent on showing her that he could keep going. Brave little bastard, she thought to herself. She would have loved to have given him more time to recover, but she knew that the longer they waited, the less likely the chance of finding the remaining Brotherhood of Steel members. Without them, she had absolutely no idea how she was supposed to infiltrate the facility where Wright was apparently keeping the FEV. "Good boy," she said. "Hopefully we can get you some proper rest soon." So, do they know? I'm going to go ahead and say that it's, I think it's likely. I think they probably kept an eye on SosKaid as she went into the facility, or rather into the base, outpost, and back out again. So I think it's probably likely that they know something. So that gives us a 65% chance. Do they know anything about what happened? Yes, they do. The settlers in the forest had been pretty shaken up after the battle with the blood bugs, but once they'd calmed down and regained their strength and wits a bit, she was able to find out what had been going on since they'd last met.
She'd learned that shortly after her and Dogmeat's departure, the group had had a long discussion about what they should do next. Apparently, there was a debate amongst them as to whether they should head to the town that SosKaid had told them about. A few of them wary to trust her. But in the end, they had agreed that they would pack up their things and prepare to head out to find it. A few, though, had decided to follow SosKaid in the meantime and see if she was actually doing what she said she was going to do and could be trusted. It was then that they had witnessed what had become of the Brotherhood members.
So what is it that they know? I think, let's look at the meaning. So that is waste and path. So they maybe saw which direction they took them. Did they take them into the forest? Actually, okay, well this says no anyway. And it's an extreme no. So I think it went in the opposite direction. I think maybe that's what waste means. Maybe they took them to, like they saw someone going off towards some kind of waste site. So that might be a ruin.
They said they'd lost sight of Dogmeat and SosKaid after a while of following them and ended up back in the forest. They hadn't seen the attack, but they did notice a small group pushing some apparent prisoners roughly along the road that ran alongside the NCR outpost.
So I've just flicked to a page here, which is a drive-in cinema. And it's got a big scary picture of a deathclaw on it. Now, I hope it wasn't a deathclaw because I can't handle a deathclaw. So I think they were dragged to the drive-in theatre, which is just outside of town, maybe in a clearing in the forest or adjacent to the forest, something like that. Never been to a drive-in cinema, but I feel like they're often a little bit out of town. So that's where they went. I think they're going to lead me to the edge of the forest and point SosKaid in the right direction.
One of the settlers had then hurried along the forest edge to try and find out more. The group had been moving slowly and talking loudly. They said something about a drive-in, if that means anything to you? One of the settlers had told her. This hadn't meant anything to SosKaid, but it was at least a direction. She had asked if the group had had any discerning features or evidence as to what faction they might belong to. Maybe NCR? She had thought hopefully for a minute and then caught herself. No. On second thought, she hoped the NCR weren't the kind to be slitting throats and dragging off people in the dark, but you never knew. There were nasty people in whatever group or ideology, she reminded herself.
But first we're going to sleep and eat some food. I'm not being super meticulous about tracking the time and the amount of food and stuff, but I do think for the survival nature of it, I do want to make sure that she's scavenging food and getting enough to at least eat and drink every day. So the expected scene now is that the group lead SosKaid, so after resting, through the forest and point out the cinema. Okay, so that's expected. Let's see if that's what happens. It's a 10, so yes, that is what happens.
SosKaid had been relieved when, just after a few hours, Dogmeat seemed to be breathing normally again in his sleep and appeared to be getting better rather than worse. So, probably not poisoned, she'd thought at the time, and that assumption seemed to be holding up. She herself had crashed out almost immediately after eating and couldn't believe how well she had slept before being dragged out of her reverie by one of the settlers gently rousing her at dawn. The settler had told her that they needed to be on their way so as not to miss the group moving on, and had pointed out once more the direction they'd seen the Brotherhood members being taken, this time in daylight. SosKaid had nodded groggily, but perked up when she saw Dogmeat lying next to the fire, face on his paws watching her intently. He started licking his nose excitedly when she sat. She reached out her arms and he had bounded up into her lap, lapping at her face. "Yuck, off," she'd said, giggling. They'd packed up their things, checked their supplies, and hurriedly followed the settler to the road to the drive-in, whatever that was.
So SosKaid and Dogmeat, they get to the edge of the forest. The sun's just coming up. At this point, they made an early start, and she can see not too far away, just down a little hill a bit, a clearing and this sort of towering shadow of this broken big outdoor screen, something like that.
Having walked for the best part of half a day, SosKaid slowed as she and Dogmeat rounded a little bend in the road. There was a pre-war sign not far ahead. A breeze had picked up and the once glitzy-shaped piece of metal hung at an awkward angle on its ancient post. The sign seemed to have been made in the shape of something that looked like an oversized terminal screen with the remains of painted light bulbs adorning its edges. The exaggerated and slightly manic font still legible. "Fall Creek Drive-In Sensation. As much fun as you can have in the backseat of a Chrysalis," read a speech bubble protruding from the winking, grinning face of a perfect-toothed and jauntily fedoraed gentleman. She shielded her eyes from the glaring sun, beginning its long descent through the sky in front of her, and saw the outline of a building matching the sign's shape not too far in the distance. The midday heat and dust in the air giving it a wavering quality. "That has to be it," she thought. "Let's go, boy. Nice and slow," she said, and they slipped back into the edge of the tree line to get in closer.
So SosKaid sort of makes her way along, and she sort of sets up outside of the fence on a little hill and just spends half an hour sort of scoping the place out. And so we're going to do a perception check to see if she sees anything. Oh, very much so. So that's a tag skill. She actually has 4 successes on that.
Closer to the drive-in, SosKaid and Dogmeat slipped out of the tree line and made their way, low and quiet, behind a line of rusted-out car bodies standing along the fence line of the drive-in. She settled her back against the door of one of the cars and caught her breath, focusing her hearing to listen for any sign that they'd been spotted. For a few moments, it was quiet. Only the sound of the picking up wind throwing dust particles at the rusted cars and the tortured creaking of various sheets of tin being disturbed from their slumber. And then she heard it. A high-pitched laugh from the vicinity of the large screen. It sent a shiver down her spine.
So we'll call that an exceptional yes. So she sees... What does she see? She sees bargain and free. Okay, so I think, although we thought maybe it was some kind of monster because it didn't look human, I think that it was raiders.
SosKaid shifted from her haunches back into a low crouch and with small, quick steps made her way along the continuous row of cars, peeking through the gaps as she passed, trying to find a position where she could get a better look in without exposing herself. They followed the line along and made its wide arc for another 50 meters or so. Her quads and back were aching, but she kept moving, slowly but steadily, getting closer to the source of the laughter and the growing volume and mutter of voices. Human at least, she thought, but felt no actual reassurance from this fact.
And so I think she sees the 2 Brotherhood of Steel members there, and they're trying to bargain their way out.
SosKaid slowed and let the situation reveal itself to her between the gaps in the cars and chain-link fence. She settled behind the last one in the queue at the entrance to the drive-in. Through the gaps, she could see them pretty clearly now. 3 raiders stood in a loose semicircle before Hawthorne and Ramirez. The Brotherhood members were on their knees in a clearing of cars in front of the huge building SosKaid now understood to have been some sort of communal screen.
I think there's probably no more than 5. It needs to be more than 3 because they were able to capture 2 Brotherhood of Steel members, although I think they did catch them by surprise. Are there more than 5? I think it's unlikely. There are more than 5. Okay, so then I'm going to say that there's 6.
2 more raiders were standing loosely facing towards the entrance where SosKaid and Dogmeat were hidden, and one more, she noticed, with an involuntary wrinkle of her nose, appeared to be squatting nearby with no apparent shame. "Oi, dickhead!" said one of the 2 at the entrance, turning around to the squatter. There was a pop and a puff of dust under the white shining derriere of the raider, and he scrambled to the side, nearly falling in his own business. "Jesus fucking Christ!" he exclaimed in surprise as he scrambled to his feet and pulled up his less than unsoiled pants. "You'll fucking pay for that, Skinner!" spat the squatter as he pulled his own pistol from his pocket and made a meaningful stride towards the gate. There was giggling from the pair there and the high laughter from the one with the prisoner.
6 raiders is pretty bloody difficult for SosKaid and Dogmeat alone. I think she would need to either break them out or allow them to escape somehow. I think she's maybe going to try and... Oh, this is tough.
"Sit the fuck down, Grobbo," came a quiet but authoritative voice from the largest of the raiders. The raider who'd spoke half turned to eyeball the until recently striding Grobbo, who'd now stopped dead in his tracks, swaying slightly. The man was bigger than anyone SosKaid had ever seen outside of the super mutants. Ripped hams of arms threatened to pop out of the horrific spiked armour covering him from his absent neck to his knees.
And I think the dodgy one, Ramirez, I think he's giving away the location of the settlement that they came across earlier, which is none other than Kesha, I think it's called, which I've decided in my head is a mostly ghoul settlement. And so he is willing to give up that location and give them away, and he figures he'll get his freedom, the ghouls will get killed, the raiders get what they want, that's fine. Now, raiders aren't that honourable, so it doesn't mean they're not going to just kill them anyway. So he hasn't actually told them where it is, but he's told them he knows about it and that there is some really valuable things there. Either something really valuable in particular, or just, it's a merchant trading sort of place, or it will be once this merchant sets up there, and so it's worth to raid. Maybe just to get some slaves, whatever. I guess ghoul slaves are good because you don't have to worry about radiation.
From the distance she was at, SosKaid could see that Hawthorne had some sort of gag on her mouth and looked terrified. Ramirez had his gag down around his neck and apparently continued his interrupted conversation with the leader. Was he smiling?
So that's what he's doing. I think Scribe Sarah Hawthorne, she is really against this. She's young and she's, untested really, but she is not that, she's a good person. So she's really against this, and I think maybe even she's at risk of some abuse as well, being raiders.
SosKaid could only make out snatches, but when she caught a glimpse of Ramirez's face between the shifting standing figures, she could indeed see that he was wearing a nervous smile. The leader seemed to be pondering his words. Ramirez jerked his head in a direction up the road and held up his bound hands in front of him. "And I can take you there," she thought she heard him say.
Okay, so here's what happens. There's 6 of them there. 3 decide, he says he'll tell them where it is, he'll show them, he'll go with them, and he'll even help take out the ghouls for them. So 3 or 4 of them are going to break off. Is it 3? No, it's 4. So 4 of them are going to break off, and I think they've made like a small hideout inside the big broken screen of this thing. It's not a long-term base or anything. They're just they've been scouting out the Brotherhood of Steel and the NCR because they're on a mission to find out more information about the surrounding areas because they want to expand their little network of operations or whatever. So 4 of them are going to go off with Ramirez leading them towards Kesha, and they're going to leave Hawthorne there with 2 of them. So she's in danger of abuse, definitely. But 2 of them, I think SosKaid, between her sniper rifle and, her hunting rifle and Dogmeat, can probably take 2 of them. And I think that's exactly what we're going to do now.
The huge raider seemed to think for a minute and then leaned forward and grabbed Ramirez's proffered arms in one hand. He shoved them into the prisoner's face and with a smooth movement cut up through the bonds with his hunting knife, being careful to take a slice of the man's face as he did it. Ramirez fell forward on his elbows, clutching at the gash on his cheek. The other raiders laughed and one stepped forward to get a boot into the side of the prostrate Ramirez's head before stepping back into line. The leader was picking his nails with his bloodied knife and said something quietly, nodding towards the prisoners. 2 of them forcefully picked Ramirez off the ground and shoved him forward toward the gate, weapons raised. The Brotherhood of Steel member staggered into a stride and said, "This will be worth your while," before spitting out some of the blood that was running into his mouth from the fresh cut. The leader and the raider closest to him followed the 3 out onto the road, walking casually. One of the remaining men stayed in his guarding position, and the one with the high laugh began circling Hawthorne and muttering something with a grin. SosKaid had pushed down the sick feeling that had suddenly appeared in her stomach. Hawthorne was definitely not safe, but SosKaid knew that she had to wait until the others had gotten far enough away before she made her move. Bastards, she muttered to herself and lay low behind the car, listening to the footsteps crunch along the road in the direction that she had been travelling.
So SosKaid waits for the four of them to leave. It's the beginning of the day. They say they're not going to waste any time. And SosKaid watches. So this is another 2 hours. So we're now sort of mid-morning. Mid-morning, she's going to watch them go. And she needs to wait until they're far enough away that she can get into a fight with these remaining two without them hearing.
SosKaid's back complained at her from the position she was crouched in, but she didn't dare move. The car she was behind was angled in such a way that the walking raiders couldn't see her where she was, but the blind spot was small. She'd worried that if she shifted too much, one of them looking back along the track might see her boot. She looked down at Dogmeat's wet nose that was poking out from under the car. "Good boy," she whispered before holding her breath and listening intently. She hadn't been able to hear what was going on in the yard, but she wasn't yet confident to look. "A few more minutes," she whispered in equal part to herself as to her companion. "Then we can see what's what and make a plan." She waited.
So I think she's going to wait a couple of hours. Did the raiders take Hawthorne inside, or is she being kept outside? The weather's fine outside, some of this thing. I'd say, did they keep her outside? I think it's unlikely. I think they probably want to get her out of sight. So, did they keep her outside? Extreme, yes. Okay.
Once the group had gotten far enough away, SosKaid peered out from behind the car and watched the shrinking figures until they disappeared around the corner of the long dusty road. Time to make her move, she thought, and peered over the hood of the car to see what was happening in the yard. It had been quiet for a while.
So, not only do they keep her outside, but they're sort of almost showing off. They're being really brazen, like, hey, we've got so much control here, we can just, sit around outside with this Brotherhood of Steel scribe. And they're not smart. They're sitting out, basking in the overcast clouds. So I think what we're going to do, that means it's unlikely we'll be able to break her out because they're out in the open. So this means we're going to start shooting, I think.
One of the raiders was sitting in a rusty deck chair near the entrance to the drive-in. He had apparently stood resolutely on guard, at attention, until exactly the moment his boss was out of sight before dragging over the chair and flopping down onto it, smoking profusely and staring up at the beginnings of an overcast sky. The other raider, the one with the nasty laugh, had been busying himself with something inside the giant screen, coming in and out of the door with ropes, wire, and some nasty-looking tools. Hawthorne was lying on her side in the dirt, apparently exhausted. Thankfully, no one had touched her yet, but SosKaid didn't think that state of affairs would remain so for long. SosKaid assessed the situation. There was one inside and one lounging on the deck chair. Should be easy enough to take out the lounger and then the high laugher as he inevitably came running out at the sound of the shot. She checked the slide of her hunting rifle and carefully mounted it on the hood ornament of the car. She put the head of the reclining raider in her sights and took a deep breath. Wait, she thought suddenly. Don't assume things are as they seem. Her father's voice in her head again. She didn't actually know there weren't more raiders inside the screen. There's no such thing as overprepared. She slid the barrel of her rifle carefully back off the car and opened her backpack. I think we're going to do our trick of planting one of our frag mines. So that's the first thing we're going to do. SosKaid, she assesses the layout of the place. Maybe there's some cars, or there's definitely some cars lying around, so there might be a bit of cover. She's going to try to sneak closer to the cinema, place a frag mine or two,
and then retreat back to a spot in line with that frag line so that when she takes the shot and someone inevitably comes running after her, there's a chance that they're going to run over that mine.
SosKaid looked at the frag mines laid out in the dirt in front of her. Probably she could only reliably get one down without pushing her luck too much of remaining undetected. She put the others back in her bag and picked up the remaining one, remembering to check for signs of failure like she'd been shown back in Newark. Leaving her hunting rifle behind the car, she drew her pistol in the other hand and motioned for Dogmeat to stay where he was. She peered over the hood again and saw that the lounging raider had stood up and was dragging his chair out of the creeping shadow of the immense screen before setting it down again and reclining once more with a sigh. Just then there was a loud metallic crash and SosKaid jumped as she saw the raider inside the screen shove open the makeshift door dramatically and stride out. Damn it, she thought. But at least she'd have them both in sight now, as she tried to lay her trap.
So the first thing she's going to do is, can she succeed a sneak test? Can she succeed a sneak test? How difficult is this going to be? Maybe I'm not making things difficult enough. It's daylight. There's not a lot around, so I think it's going to be difficulty 2. We're going to buy an action point. And we're going to do sneak... agility, which is 11. And we need 2 successes.
The high laugher walked over to Hawthorne with an exaggerated stroll. The prisoner struggled back to her knees looking terrified, trying ineffectually to spit some dust out of her still gagged mouth. "Well, well, my little bird," he said, with a happy and friendly voice that didn't match the sleaze dripping off his lopsided grin. "I've got everything prepared for our little date in the presidential suite." He high-laughed to himself again and began circling his prisoner. The reclining raider sat up on the edge of the chair and chuckled, apparently keen to watch the show. SosKaid saw her moment and moved out from behind the car in a low shuffle, pistol in one hand, mine in the other. She had to move quickly while they were distracted and get the mine into position just outside the entrance in line with where she assumed they would come. High Laugher seemed completely oblivious to anything other than his prize, but the other one looked like he was starting to get bored with his partner's antics. As if in slow motion, she saw his head begin to turn toward her.
We do not get it.
Fuck, thought SosKaid, and she scrambled a meter to her left and pressed her back to the last car in the queue to the entrance. As she slid to the ground, she looked in panic over to Hawthorne, and their eyes caught just for a second before she disappeared from sight.
I'm going to use a luck. Do we get luck points back for resting? That's important to know, because we did rest now. But it does seem strong if you get them all back every time you rest. So luck points. Regaining luck. At the start, you start a quest with a number of luck. Once you've spent a point, it can't be used again to get refreshes when you reach a milestone or when you start a new quest. Okay, so we probably haven't done a milestone yet, so we're not going to refresh them. We are going to use one, because I really don't want to get spotted now. Let's use one. Please, come on. 19 again. Bugger!
Her heart sank as she heard a fateful, "What the fuck?" come from the guard nearest her. She heard the circling footsteps stop and the unmistakable sound of weapons being drawn. "Go check it out, Grobbo," came the disturbing high-pitched voice.
So we lost the luck point, and she does get spotted. I don't think that they saw a person and started shooting, but I think they see some movement, and one says to the other, go check that out. So SosKaid is now hiding behind one of the cars as someone comes to check her out. Is she able to remain hidden?
SosKaid heard the crunch of footsteps make their way in her direction. Fuck, she thought and considered her options. It sounded like only one was coming. She heard the other continue to gloat. "You don't have any more friends out there, do you, little bird?" the voice said. "It's not like you Brotherhood boys to be sneaking around, though, is it?" It continued. If she could take out the one coming quietly enough and out of sight, it might give her the upper hand for the other one. She hurriedly but carefully put the mine back into her pack and drew her knife with her left hand.
Yes, she definitely is. That's a crit. She is able to remain hidden as he's approaching her, and she's going to have to make a sneak, ideally a sneak attack, maybe even with her knife. Because if she can do it quietly, she's behind a car or a truck or something. So if she can do it quietly, then maybe she won't get spotted straight away.
SosKaid put the side of her face to the ground and peered through the narrow slit under the car and to the boots coming her way. There was a metal rod dragging lazily on the ground beside them. A long weapon, she thought. If she could stay low and get in close with her knife, she might just have a chance. She thought for a second and swapped it with the pistol in her right. The boots veered off toward the right side of the car. A small mercy, considering if she had to go right, she would have surely been seen by the other raider. She slowly began to make her way around to the left.
Sneak attacks, 29. I love sneak attacks. So if the enemy is unaware of you before you attack, the difficulty of the attack is reduced by 1, and your attack gains vicious. Excellent. So she's hiding there behind this cart. She's sort of stealing herself. She has her knife in one hand. Let's roll up or write up the stat points of these raiders. So I think we have two normal raiders, both with a pipe gun, and I think one of them has the Ripper. These are nasty guys.
SosKaid's breathing started coming in a little ragged as she crouched on her haunches, listening intently to the footsteps behind her. She needed to keep some spring in her legs in case he came around so that she could get her knife up and into his neck. She heard the footsteps getting closer to her behind the car. A bead of sweat crawled lazily through the dust on the back of her neck.
So this means they're going to have 8 hit points, defense 1. So that means we don't even need to roll to hit him. I think, okay, so he's coming up to the car and she does that classic trick where she sneaks back around the other side of the car. And maybe Dogmeat is sort of there, makes a little growl or something, which puts the guy off his guard because he thinks, it's just a dog. And he sort of walks around the car and she gets up behind him and she gets in with her knife.
A small growl came from behind the car further back where she'd left Dogmeat, and the footsteps stopped. She peeked over her shoulder, around the edge of the car, her breathing starting to pick up. She saw the filthy raider crouched in the dust, examining the marks she had left there from moving around. Now. She had to go now.
It's a hit. We're doing 3 damage. It's going to be vicious. And I definitely want to spend some action points for extra damage. I think I can get 1 extra damage per action point spent. So with the assistance, Dogmeat actually gets to roll a d20 and add that to my success. On a melee or thrown weapon only, you can spend action points to add 1 dice per action point sent up to a maximum of 3. I'm going to spend them all, baby. I really want to take this guy out. I'm going to spend 3 points.
As she turned, she saw Dogmeat emerge from the car in front of the raider. Perfect timing, she thought. The raider remained crouched and slid his tire iron further down in his hand, ready to strike. Come here, mutt, he muttered to himself as Dogmeat half-trotted, half-stalked towards him.
And it means we're going to roll 6 dice. Plus bloody Dogmeat. So he afflicts his own melee damage if the attack is successful. So, here's what's going to happen. Dogmeat is rolling 2, so we have a total of 7 dice. All vicious. This guy is totally dead. Gets his tire iron, he doesn't want to waste a bullet, and he's ready to hit Dogmeat. Just as he does that, SosKaid jumps up behind him and stabs him in the neck. And as she does that, Dogmeat jumps up and grabs him as well.
1 step, 2, 3 in quick succession, keeping low. The raider turned his head slightly, but he was too late. SosKaid drove her knife up into his neck with her right hand on the opposite side of his turn. She felt it go in and hit resistance at its point as it met his cheekbone. There was a flash of fear and surprise in the man's eyes. Dogmeat backed off, thankfully remaining reasonably quiet. SosKaid twisted the blade as the man gurgled.
Good teamwork. He's got 8 hit points, we've got vicious, we could kill him. Bam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So he immediately goes down. Did the other guy notice? I'm going to say it's 50-50. Yes, unfortunately he did notice.
The raider got in one horribly wet breath and managed to get out a loud "Cut!" before starting to convulse slightly in the dust. There was the zinging sound of a bullet ricocheting off the car behind her. Fuck, she thought. Close, but not quite. She quickly wiped her eyes. Dust and a few tears had begun to form a paste. She took an overdue breath and switched the weapons again in her hands, checking one last time the slide on her pistol. Not out of trouble yet.
So he did notice. He then... This is bad. So we were able to take this one guy out, but the other guy noticed, and I think he suspects it's someone coming to rescue Sarah Hawthorne, and so he holds his gun to her head.
SosKaid motioned for Dogmeat to stay and backed up again behind the car, breathing heavily. No more shots came. The high-pitched laugh rang out, seemingly unperturbed. So you do have a little friend, little bird. Why don't you come out here and join the party, little friend? SosKaid peered over the bonnet, ready to duck down again if she saw a weapon aimed at her. She saw the smiling face of the raider looking right at her, pistol held to the head of his prisoner. With his other hand, he gave a little wave. "Ah, good," he said, smile disappearing behind a pink tongue licking his cracked lips. Just the right flavour of party guest.
Are we going to risk Sarah Hawthorne's life by trying to take a shot at him? Are we going to try and negotiate him? So SosKaid is going to try and convince him. She says, okay. She puts her gun down on the ground next to her. She takes off her hunting rifle and also puts that down on the ground next to her. And she puts her hands up. She says, look, I have to show you something. Let the Brotherhood of Steel member go, and you can have me as a prisoner instead. I think this horny raider is not racing to kill either of the two, because there's two women here, and he's there alone. I think he thinks maybe he can have some fun.
Stay there, boy. Don't let him see you, and come in if I whistle. SosKaid whispered to her companion. Stay. She felt sick as she took a few steps away from her discarded weapons, walking slowly toward the grinning raider, hoping that Dogmeat had understood her instructions. She needed the raider off his guard, she thought as she looked closely at his face. He licked his lips again, brimming with confidence. Hopefully she could use that to their advantage. That's right, nice and slow, he said, his voice low and hungry now. She didn't have to try very hard to look scared and vulnerable, and she knew this was the only advantage she had left. She placed another heavy foot in the dirt, Dogmeat retreating to the other side of the car, his shoulder blades protruding from his fur as he stalked low and slow.
Okay, does he come and try and restrain SosKaid? Yes, he does. Okay, so he walks up to SosKaid, and at this stage she basically submits. I think she lets him... He sort of ties her hands behind her back and he says, right, let's take this party inside, shall we? And so he ties up SosKaid and grabs her by the back of the hands, like her hands are behind her back tied, and he sort of grabs the rope between, or the bit of wire between her hands and Hawthorne's, and drags them both in towards the inside of the cinema where he thinks he's going to have some fun. How are we going to get out of this one?
The twisted piece of wire bit into SosKaid's wrists, drawing a little blood as the two women were pulled roughly by the rope attaching both of their improvised handcuffs. SosKaid staggered, eventually falling to her knees in the dust before quickly righting herself and regaining her footing. Her mind started ticking over. They had to find an advantage. Something. Anything. The cold feeling in her stomach intensified as they were dragged into the stinking structure. She looked at her fellow captive, desperate to see some spark, some hope in her eyes, but there was nothing but fear. The laugh rang out again, bouncing off the small echoey space around them. There was no question. They were in serious trouble. Thank you for joining me again on another episode of A Wasteland Story. I'm having so much fun as always putting this series together, and this episode actually marks about the halfway point for the first season. I started this show as a completely solitary endeavour, just a way for me to start solo role-playing in a world that I'm really familiar with and love. I only decided to make it into a podcast because audio happens to be the medium I'm most comfortable with, and mostly my handwriting sucks. And I thought that if there were just a small handful of people out there who enjoyed it, it might be just enough to push me to keep doing it regularly. What I couldn't have anticipated in my strange little Fallout solo RPG experiment was that it would be regularly downloaded by thousands of people. Almost every day I hear from someone about how much they like the work I'm doing and want to share with me their own stories of solo role-playing. I am so humbled by this experience and really treasure all of these messages of support, encouragement, or just interaction. So thank you all and keep it up. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can email me over at awastelandstorypodcast@gmail.com or find me under PJ Sack on the Reddit threads or on Blue Sky. Thank you as always to Fallout Cascadia for letting me use some of their wonderful music. If you like the video games, you should totally go and check out what's happening on the Fallout project over there. All the musical credits and links are in the show notes, as is the link to the Solo Roleplayers podcast if you want to hear actual plays of other games I'm playing and interviews with some of the content creators that helped me get into this hobby, including the amazing Tana Pigeon who brought the world Mythic, the tool which has been absolutely key in allowing me to play Fallout in this way. I'm off to start on the next script and find out how the hell SosKaid, Dogmeat and Hawthorne are going to get out of this sleazy raider's grip. So until next time, remember, when coming across a strange figure or creature in the wasteland, don't forget to raise your hands in a motion of peace and speak loudly and slowly, expressing your desire for jolly cooperation. Until next time.